There are 5 fish that will work the layer of waste sitting on your gravel every day without you touching it, and I am going to name all 5 and tell you exactly how many of each to keep. But before I do, there is something you need to know that no pet store will tell you when they sell you one. Not a single fish on this list eats fish waste. None of them do. No freshwater fish sold anywhere in the world eats feces as a meaningful part of its diet, and the entire idea that one does is a retail invention. What these 5 actually do is far more useful than that, and once you understand the difference, you will stock a bottom layer that genuinely works instead of buying an animal that quietly starves while your gravel gets worse. Here is the sequence almost everybody in this hobby has been through. You notice the brown material collecting between your gravel and along the back corners. You mention it to somebody at the store, and they walk you over to a tank of small catfish and tell you these will clean that up for you. You buy 3. You take them home and you do not feed them directly, because you were told they eat the leftovers, and feeding them separately would defeat the purpose. For a few weeks it seems to work, because they are visibly busy and the front of the substrate looks tidier. Then the brown material comes back, deeper in the gravel this time where nothing can reach it. Your nitrate readings creep up month after month no matter how many water changes you do. One of the catfish dies, then another. The third one lives, but it is thin across the back and its barbels have worn down to stubs. And the conclusion drawn is that these fish are delicate, or that the tank is just a dirty tank. And neither of those things is true. Put a figure on that year. Bottom-dwelling fish sold as cleaners run between $4 and $15 each and are bought in groups. Then replaced when they die, which for most hobbyists is $60 to $150 across a year of losses that read as bad luck. Add the gravel vacuum bought and then barely used because the fish were supposed to make it unnecessary. Add the bottled bacteria and the nitrate-reducing products bought to fight a reading that keeps climbing. Add the algae treatments because the accumulated waste is feeding the algae as well. That is $100 and upward every year spent because of one sentence spoken at a counter, and the animals paying for it are the ones being sold as the solution. That sentence is worth examining because it has a traceable origin. The phrase cleanup crew did not begin in the freshwater hobby. It comes from reef keeping, where it describes a deliberately assembled group of snails, crabs, and shrimp chosen to consume specific waste products in a marine system, and in that context, it is a reasonably accurate term used by people who know exactly what each animal does. It was transplanted wholesale into freshwater retail, where it became something else entirely. It became a sales frame applied to any fish that spends time near the bottom that lets a store sell an animal by promising it will do a chore. Nobody at that counter is lying to you on purpose. The frame is simply inherited, repeated, and never examined, and the reason it survives is that it converts a fish into an appliance, and an appliance is much easier to sell to somebody who is tired of maintenance. That is not a scandal, and almost every consumer category on earth does the same thing. What matters here is that a fish sold as an appliance gets treated like one, and the treatment is what kills it. The same frame produces the most common bait and switch in the trade. The fish sold in most stores as a common pleco or simply labeled algae eater or cleaner fish is usually Hypostomus plecostomus, or a close relative, and it grows to between 18 and 24 inches. It is sold to beginners with 20-gallon tanks as a cleaner. It outgrows that tank within 2 years. It largely stops eating algae as it matures, and it produces one of the heaviest waste loads of any fish in the freshwater hobby. An animal sold to reduce waste ends up being the single largest producer of it in the aquarium. That is the clearest possible demonstration of what happens when a living thing is described by the chore it is supposed to perform, rather than by what it actually is. Before I get to the 5, one thing worth saying now. A bottom layer is one part of a system with several, and the substrate you have, the flow through your tank, and your feeding routine all decide whether these fish can do anything at all. I have put the complete version together in one place as a full aquarium playbook, covering how every layer supports the others. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment, and if the code is on your screen right now, you can scan it and go straight there. Now here is what is actually happening on your gravel, because the material sitting there is not one substance and it does not all behave the same way. It is a mixture, and the proportions matter. A meaningful share is uneaten food that sank past the fish that were supposed to catch it. Another share is decomposing plant matter, dead leaves, and shed roots. Another share is fish waste, and the remainder is detritus, sometimes called mollum, which is the fine, brown material, left after bacteria have already broken the rest of it partway down. Those components decompose at different rates, and the important distinction is between the ones that still contain usable energy and the ones that do not. Uneaten food is still food. Soft decomposing plant matter is still food. Detritus supports a living film of bacteria and microorganisms, and that film is food. Fish waste has already been through a digestive system and stripped of most of what was in it, which is precisely why nothing eats it. So here is what these 5 fish are genuinely doing, and it is worth being exact about it. They are consuming the uneaten food before it decomposes, which is the single largest controllable input to that layer. They are grazing the biofilm and microorganisms growing on the detritus, and they are physically disturbing the top layer of the substrate as they work, which does 2 things that matter enormously. It breaks compacted material apart and lifts fine particles back into the water column where your filter can actually capture them, and it keeps oxygenated water moving through the upper substrate. That second effect is the one nobody mentions. Substrate that sits undisturbed and compacted goes anaerobic below the surface, and anaerobic pockets produce hydrogen sulfide, which is the source of the sharp smell people get when they push a finger into an old gravel bed. A worked substrate does not do that. If you have ever lifted a piece of driftwood or moved an ornament and watched a brown cloud billow up off the bottom and hang in the water for an hour, you have already seen the size of the deposit you are dealing with. That cloud is not dirt that appeared while you were not looking. It is months of accumulated material that settled into a place with no flow and no animal working it. And the reason it billows rather than staying put is that it is fine and light and would have been captured by your filter easily if anything had ever lifted it. A tank with a working bottom layer produces a far smaller cloud when you move something, not because less material is being produced, but because it never got the chance to sit still long enough to build up. But understand what is not happening. The nitrogen does not leave your aquarium. A fish that eats a piece of sunken food converts most of it back into ammonia through its own waste and respiration, and that ammonia goes into your biological filter and comes out as nitrate, which stays dissolved in your water until you remove it. Nothing on this list exports anything. The only things that remove nitrogen from a closed aquarium are water changes, plant growth, and physically taking material out. What these fish do is process that layer, prevent the worst of it forming, keep it moving to where your filter can catch it, and stop the substrate from going stagnant. That is genuinely valuable work. It is simply not the work the counter described. And that difference is what cost the fish their lives. A hobbyist who believes they bought a cleaner does not feed it, because feeding it would seem to defeat the purpose. The fish then lives on whatever falls past the midwater fish, which in a well-managed tank with disciplined feeding is close to nothing, because a well-managed tank does not produce a surplus of sinking food. So the better you manage the top of your tank, the more reliably you starve the bottom of it. The fish declines slowly across months, loses condition across the back and the belly, and in the case of the barbelled species wears its barbels down to nothing, probing sharp gravel for food that is not there. Then it dies and it is replaced, and the replacement dies the same way. The hobbyist was not doing anything wrong. They were following an instruction that described the animal as equipment. The first is the Corydoras catfish, and the species most people will find is Corydoras aeneas, the bronze cory, though the panda and sturba species fill the same role. This is the open substrate specialist, and the one that does the most visible work. A cory feeds by pushing its snout into the top layer of sand and sifting, using a set of sensitive barbels around the mouth to detect food buried just below the surface, then expelling the substrate through its gills while retaining anything edible. It is a genuinely specialized piece of anatomy, and it targets exactly the material that settles and disappears from view. There is one critical fact about them that most beginners learn the hard way, and it decides whether they thrive or slowly fail. Those barbels are soft tissue, and sharp or coarse gravel abrades them. A cory kept on sand or fine smooth gravel keeps its barbels intact and feeds normally for a decade. A cory kept on coarse angular gravel wears them down, loses the ability to locate food, and starves with food present in the tank. They are also strongly social and become inactive and hidden in small numbers. Keep 6 as an absolute minimum, 8 to 10 in a tank of 20 gallons or more, and feed them a sinking wafer or tablet directly in the evening, rather than assuming they will find leftovers. The second is the Kuhli loach, scientific name Kuhli, and it reaches the part of your tank that nothing else on this list can. A Kuhli loach is a small eel-shaped fish that spends its day inside the substrate rather than on top of it, burrowing through sand, working underneath driftwood and rockwork, and squeezing into the gaps behind and beneath every piece of decor you have placed. That is where waste accumulates worst, because it is exactly where your gravel vacuum cannot go and where flow does not reach. They are almost entirely nocturnal when first introduced, which is why people frequently believe theirs have died, and they emerge in the open only once they have been in a stable tank for some weeks and are kept in a group. Keep 6 or more, because in smaller numbers they hide permanently and you lose both the behavior and the work. They require soft sand or very fine smooth substrate, because burrowing is the entire point of the animal, and a Kuhli loach on coarse gravel is a Kuhli loach that cannot do its job. They will take sinking food readily at night. That is 2 of the 5, and this is the point where the substrate you already own starts to matter more than the stocking list does. Every fish here is limited by what is under them, and coarse gravel defeats most of the group before they begin. The full playbook covers the substrate decisions, the flow, and the feeding schedule that determine whether a bottom layer functions or slowly starves. The link is in the description and the top pinned comment, or scan the code on your screen, and it will take you there directly. The third is the zebra loach, scientific name Botia striata, and it brings something the first 2 do not, which is deliberate searching, where a Cory sifts open sand and a Kuhli works below it. A zebra loach actively hunts across the substrate and the hardscape, turning over material, pushing into crevices, and dislodging debris from the places it settles and hardens. They are noticeably more inquisitive than the rest of this list, and that inquisitiveness is the function. They also eat pest snails, which most hobbyists consider a bonus, and which is worth knowing about if you deliberately keep ornamental snails, because a zebra loach will not distinguish between the 2. They are the most peaceful of the commonly available loaches in their group, but they are still social and mildly boisterous, so keep 5 or 6 and give them caves and hardscape to work through. In a tank of 30 gallons or more, they are among the most effective substrate workers you can keep. The 4th is the whiptail catfish, scientific name Rhinoloricaria lanceolata, and it covers the surfaces that the sifters and burrowers ignore entirely. A whiptail is a slender, flattened, extremely well-camouflaged catfish that holds itself against flat surfaces and grazes with a sucker mouth, working the top film of the substrate, the surfaces of driftwood, the base of hardscape, and the lower panes of glass. Its mouth cannot sift and it cannot burrow, which is exactly why it belongs alongside the others rather than instead of them. It is peaceful to the point of being timid. It stays under 5 inches, and it is one of the few fish on this list that will spawn readily in a community tank if it is well fed. It needs driftwood present permanently because it rasps and digests wood fiber as part of its diet. 2 or 3 in a well-planted tank of 20 gallons or more work continuously and take up almost no space in the stocking budget. The 5th is the South American bumblebee catfish, scientific name Microglanus iheringi, and it handles the specific problem that the other 4 cannot solve. Some food does not settle where anything can find it. Larger sinking pellets roll under rockwork, wedge behind filter intakes, and lodge in the back corners where they decompose out of sight. And that hidden material is a disproportionate contributor to a rising nitrate reading. A bumblebee catfish is a nocturnal cave-dwelling scavenger that spends the night methodically searching those exact locations, and it locates food by scent rather than by sight. It stays around 3 inches, it is entirely peaceful toward anything it cannot swallow, and it is one of the hardiest fish in this whole group. The caveat has to be stated plainly because it is genuine. It will eat any fish small enough to fit in its mouth, which includes fry, shrimp, and adult fish under about 1 inch. Keep one, give it a cave, and do not house it with nanospecies. I want to be straightforward about the limitations because accurate information is worth more than a clean sales pitch. The first is the substrate itself, and it is the one that decides everything. Coarse gravel swallows waste below the level any of these fish can reach, which is why the material seems to vanish and then reappear as a nitrate reading. Fine sand keeps detritus sitting on top where it can be worked and where your filter can lift it. If you are setting up a tank, choose sand. If you already have gravel, this crew will still help, but they cannot reach what has gone below. The second is that this does not replace your water changes or your gravel vacuum. It reduces how much accumulates, and it prevents the substrate going stagnant. but the nitrogen still has to physically leave the tank. The third is that these are 5 separate species with their own social requirements, and a standard 20-gallon tank cannot house all 5 in proper groups. Choose 2 or 3 that match your substrate and tank size rather than attempting the complete list. There is a fourth point that is not exactly a limitation but decides how well any of this performs, and that is flow. These fish work where waste settles, and waste settles where water stops moving. If your filter return pushes across the surface and leaves the bottom still, you have created permanent dead zones in the back corners and behind the hardscape, and material will accumulate there faster than any animal can process it. Angle your outflow so there is gentle movement along the substrate, or add a small power head on low, and the same crew becomes noticeably more effective without you adding a single fish. Now, here's the mistake that collapses this entire system, and it is the same mistake every time: not feeding them. Every fish on this list requires direct, deliberate feeding, and the belief that they live on leftovers is the single reason they die. Drop a sinking wafer or tablet in the evening after the lights go off. Place it where the mid-water fish are not patrolling, and watch that it is actually being eaten rather than assuming. A well-fed bottom layer works harder, not less, because a fish in good condition forages continuously, while a starving fish conserves energy and hides. That is the inversion nobody expects. The person who feeds their cleanup crew properly gets more cleaning out of it than the person who withholds food to make them work. None of this is hidden knowledge, and none of it is complicated. Every one of these fish evolved in a river system, where the bottom is where the food is, working sand, leaf litter, and submerged wood, for exactly the material they work in your tank. They are not equipment, and they were never equipment. They are specialists that occupy a layer most hobbyists leave completely empty, and the only reason they get sold as appliances is that a fish which does a chore is easier to sell than a fish which needs a group, a substrate, and a meal. Give them those 3 things, and the layer at the bottom of your tank stops being the part you dread. If you want the complete system rather than just the stocking list, the full aquarium playbook covers the substrate and flow decisions that determine whether this works, the feeding schedule for a bottom layer, the group sizes and combinations by tank volume, and how to read a rising nitrate reading before it becomes a problem. It is all in one place, in the order you actually need it. The link is in the description and in the top pinned comment, and you can scan the code on your screen to go straight to it. And if this changed how you think about the bottom of your tank, give it a like and subscribe, because there is a great deal more where this came from.